Welcome to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Paul Berger from the Faculty of Education at Lakehead University. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me.
So, Paul, I kind of learned that Lakehead University has just held a climate forum, a climate change forum. I think it was last week. Can you tell me a little bit about that? What was involved and how many people came?
Well, it was motivated, I think, by a sense that lots of us at Lakehead are doing various things, both teaching and research that are related to climate change. But we didn't know all the other people that were working on things. So we wanted to have some sort of a forum where we get to know each other and our research interests across disciplines, but also where the community could be involved and ultimately students. So it started as an idea of a one-day thing. We were just going to bring in a couple of keynote speakers. It turned out to be a day and a half with industry, ministry people, people from other universities, and as I said, a day and a half day that was focused more specifically on students and student understanding.
So you're in the Faculty of Education. So you're training the teachers of tomorrow. What are you teaching them about climate change? How's this, what do they have to do with it?
Well, I've been lucky. I've had an interesting role I've been able to teach a class called Climate Change Pedagogy or Climate Change Education, more or less.
Pedagogy means what?
So teaching, how you would teach about something.
How you teach something, like good thing.
So I've taught 3 years in a row now, I've taught people who are becoming teachers to think about how to incorporate climate change in their lessons. And that's, I think the old way, the first way was people teaching science would teach about climate change because there's a very broad science of climate change, but we're way past that now. We need to be looking at the economics of climate change, the philosophy of climate change, the sociology of climate change, the politics of climate change. So whether you're teaching English to senior students or whether you're teaching social studies in grade 3, there are ways to bring climate change in that help prepare students for the world that they're inheriting, that they're in and going to become adults in. So part of that is, in my teaching, is just getting them to understand the nature of the problem and the urgency of the problem, but also to understand the phenomenal opportunities that are being created and the things that we can actually do to tackle the crisis if we just get going and doing them.
So in a way, you're bringing together all these different folks from different disciplines that are already engaged in dealing with climate change to kind of connect together.
That's exactly what happened in the forum. Yeah, we had a section on a whole session themed on Lake Superior and the watersheds and the impacts of climate change, the challenges, what we're doing about that, the bioeconomy, so how trees might be part of the solution of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by using sustainable forestry processes. We had a session on climate modeling, so the big climate models tell us what's happening in general, but they don't tell us as well about what's happening in specific small areas, and so a session about that. And then a session called Community Awareness Perspectives, where a diverse group of people talked about their own research, including some research that I've been involved in with faculty members at Lakehead to see what they think about climate change. Are they teaching about it? Do they do research about it? Do they think universities have a role in political action on climate change? So those were some of the main things we brought together, and then the first day we had a debate about whether we're rising to the challenge of climate change and tackling it. A panel for students called What is Climate Change Anyway? For basic information and a chance for them to ask questions. And a couple of great sessions. One was on the health impacts of climate change for people in the Arctic, and another on the mental and emotional impacts of climate change for people in our region who are close to the land. So people who are farming, fishing, hunting, those sorts of people.
Well, just from my own perspective, I'm an avid gardener. I live outside of town here, and in the 45 years I've been gardening and living in the bush, I've seen changes. I mean, back in the 70s, you could count on 3 weeks of 40 below at night. We don't even get 40 below anymore. I can hardly remember even a day or a night when we've had 40 below. And now we're all worried about ticks. We've never had ticks. So that's kind of the downside. And we've also lost moose. It seems like the moose have all moved out. You know, on the plus side, gardening, I have a much larger growing season, at least a month more than I used to, which is great as a gardener. So this climate change has pluses and minuses.
In the short term, it does certainly. And another statistic I read recently was that we used to have about 98 days of frost-free season, growing season. And this year it looks like we're close to matching the record of 140 days, which I believe was set last year. 98, 140. This is an indication of radical change. And absolutely, your tomatoes probably have a better chance. I planted squash a couple of years ago, and I thought they were, at the beginning of September, I thought all was lost. And then we had a really warm September, and they were brilliant. So there can be little gains like that, but people really should see those statistics or feel those changes. And I think people feel a deep sense of concern because the rapidity of the changes is troubling. And the thing is, we could be tackling this in a much greater way than we are, and we're not so far. And that's what's really troubling for me and for a number of my colleagues as well. Mm-hmm. How do we get people to engage when they see and they know that there's change? They hear it on the radio all the time. Yesterday I heard that the tea is of a different quality because of the variation in extreme weather in India and in Assam, one of the major tea growing areas of the world. So it's not a niche thing anymore. It's not environmentalist. It's everybody knows climate change is a problem. Everybody, I believe, is concerned at different levels, and we need that concern to translate into pressure on our policymakers to move more quickly on this.
So what were some of the highlights from the forum that just happened at Lakehead?
I'd say the biggest highlight for me personally was Kelsey Jones-Casey's presentation. Now, she was a Fulbright scholar. She came up and worked for 6 months, and full disclosure, I was a supervisor during that time. She went out and she did 35 interviews of people living close to the land, asked them what changes they'd seen and how they felt about climate change. And then she came to present that, and she brought 3 community members, one from Pick River First Nation, one from Red Rock, and one from Nullaloo. They all spoke about the changes they'd seen, and then also briefly about how they felt about those changes. For me, that was really exceptional because mostly we've learned to not speak about climate change. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like a taboo subject, and people they're concerned, but they don't share it often, sometimes with anybody. And I remember Kelsey telling me earlier in her research that she'd spoken to someone who knew all kinds of changes. He just described a whole bunch of things that were deeply concerning. And she said to him, well, do you talk about your hunting buddies on your way to hunting about these things? And he said, oh, no, I would never mention it. And that's the way it's been with climate change. And I think one of the big changes we need is we need to shift that so that people are willing to talk to the people close to them at least and say, I am concerned, and I'm concerned about the future, and I wonder what we can do. I wonder what we can do to help with this.
Well, I'm really concerned too, and I am concerned with the future, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this in just a minute. Please stay with us, and we'll be right back.